Idaho Matters podcast is brought to you by St. Luke's On-Demand Virtual Care, which allows patients to see a provider from their home using a computer or smartphone with on-demand care for common ailments, such as a cough, sore throat, or a sinus issue. More information at stlukesonline.org.
Do you ever feel like you just don't have the time to sit down and read the news every morning? Sometimes things get so hectic you can't even scroll through your feeds while you're trying to get ready. A podcast from Boise State Public Radio has you covered. I'm George Prentice, and I want to invite you to check out The Connector every weekday morning. You can get up to speed on all of the Idaho news you need to start your day without ever interrupting your morning routine. All you have to do is hit play. That's The Connector from Boise State Public Radio. Find it wherever you get your podcasts.
More Idaho Matters now from the studios of Boise State Public Radio News. I'm Gemma Gaudet. There were more than 2,000 shipwrecks on the Northwest coast, some of them still standing in the sand. I mean, literally like these ghostly skeletons. One good example is the Peter Iredale on the beach near Astoria, Oregon. They're really popular with tourists, but they have a rich and varied history and a good-bad relationship with the Indigenous tribes that call the coast home.
By the early 19th century, the Northwest coast actually had a reputation as a place of violence because of some incidents that did happen during the fur trade. The Indigenous rescue far outweighs those incidents, but still the idea of this place as a violent coast led actually to a lot of violence against Indigenous people on the coast in the wake of shipwrecks.
Anna King has been exploring the history of the wrecks and how they became interwoven with tribes like the Chinook Indian Nation. She's the senior correspondent and special projects lead for Northwest Public Broadcasting, and she has a new documentary called Wrecked, and she's joining us today to talk more about the history of shipwrecks. Anna, welcome back to the program.
Good morning, Gemma.
So, Anna, talk to us about how you got started with the project examining these shipwrecks.
Yeah, the first time I heard about Cole Thrush's book Wrecked that was in progress, I was sitting at Sacagawea Park on the confluence of the Snake and the Columbia Rivers outside of Pasco, Washington, and I was listening to him speak with a Native American friend of mine. As soon as I heard the premise of the book, shipwrecks on the Northwest coast and how they shaped both colonizing culture and that of sovereign Native American tribes, I knew I had to do something. And Cole's book Wrecked is just a wonderful read. It lays out an argument that is the retelling of shipwreck tales. He highlights the ways that myths of settler colonialism wove their way into history and culture. And he argues that the myths that Indigenous people would just disappear, the myth that people could control an endless, abundant nature, are just not true. And Rex shows how the history of shipwrecks is fraught and highlights the unfinished business of colonization on the Northwest coast.
So you actually went on a quest to find some of these shipwrecks and the people who know their history, including the wreck of the Peter Iredale, which a lot of people might have actually seen if they've been on the Oregon coast. I mean, I grew up actually seeing that shipwreck numerous times growing up in that area. So I want to play a clip of Cole talking about this particular wreck.
I started doing research into who Peter Iredale the man was. He was the ship's builder and owner, and its namesake. He died a few years before it wrecked in Liverpool. And it appears from a biography that was found by his own descendant that he was actually, he had made his money off the last years of the illegal slave trade off the west coast of Africa. And so that really changes what this thing means, I think, what this object means. It connects us to a much darker history, a much more complicated story than just kind of tourist nostalgia. There's something else going on here beyond that.
Anna, you talk in the documentary about how popular this ship is with tourists who come to that beach. I mean, as I mentioned, I grew up about 2 hours in Southwest Washington from this shipwreck, and we actually took school trips. We took field trips down to Astoria and saw this shipwreck.
Yeah.
But for folks who aren't familiar, where is this wreck? And describe what's left of the ship for folks who haven't seen it, because it's something to behold.
Yeah, I encourage everyone that can to visit Fort Stevens State Park in the very northwest corner of Oregon. It's a little bit south of Astoria, and the park is home to the Peter Iredale wreck, as you said. And it's got these amazing skeletal bones, Gemma. The ship is dug deep into the sand. It's an amazing sienna color of the rusted metal ribs. And it's got these deep tide pools at the base that ripple with the ocean winds. And each salty pool looks like a little Zen garden, kind of with concentric circles making lovely patterns in there.
So, Anna, how are these shipwrecks tied to the indigenous people who live in these areas along the coast?
Yeah, all of these shipwrecks landed on sovereign nations' ground. So Native Americans were encountering people with whose goals were different and cultures were unique. The British, the Spaniards, the Russians. Many of these shipwrecks happened at the age of the imperial competition. Trade goods that they were bringing in were things like cloth, buttons, guns, and they were taking away furs. Later in later decades of the 20th century, they were taking away ballast, lumber, and oil. It was kind of like a let's grab everything we can time in which they were
Mhm.
risking so much through these hazardous waters to get there. Tony Johnson, the chairman of the Chinook Indian Nation, told me that Native American people with special powers used to sing in whales to the shore. And when those whales would arrive on the shore, they would mark them with their names or a special marking to
Mhm.
signify who got the best cuts of blubber or meat off of those animals. And when the ships arrived, they treated them much the same way. Here was a sovereign nation, or many nations that were sovereign, um, welcoming in resources. Sorry for my dog. Welcoming in resources that were I'm sorry for the dog. Welcoming
Oh,
in
don't worry about it.
resources that were kind of, the same as a whale, these resources going towards the shore, and as they washed ashore, they just saw it as more resources.
Mm. And Anna, I mean, I think it's fair to say that there are good stories, but there are also some not so great stories surrounding how both the sailors and the native peoples were impacted by these wrecks. So I want to play a little bit about the wreck of one ship and actually how it led to violence.
One story early on that comes to us from Indigenous stories, and that is the wreck of the William and Anne, which was a Hudson's Bay Company ship, I believe. The crew died. At the time, the people at Fort Vancouver thought that the Indians had killed the crew, and so they sent another ship down to retaliate. It was later determined that the crew had died because of the wreck, that the Indians did not play a role in that. Unfortunately, the Hudson's Bay Company sent this other ship down to retaliate and make a point, and they attacked a Clatsop village and killed a bunch of Indians and destroyed the village and burned it.
So Anna, can you tell us more about the story of the William and Anne?
Yeah, in his book, Cool Thrush, and in our documentary, we talk about how this ship came, and it also we talk about how all of these ships that were washed up on the coast needed some help. Sailors were oftentimes rescued by tribes. Some sailors were cared for by the tribes through the winter until they could be reunited with Western outposts or different ships. Other ships went down, and colonial people blamed the tribes for those deaths. And that is the case of the William and Anne, where a Clatsop village was bombed on the northwest coast. This all happened in about 1829. More than 25 people were killed in the shipwreck. But then, with the subsequent attack, the Clatsop people suffered great loss as well and had nothing to do with that shipwreck.
Mm. If you're just joining us, we're talking with Anna King. She is senior correspondent and special projects lead for Northwest Public Broadcasting. And we're talking about a new documentary called Wrecked. And if you're just joining us halfway through the conversation, do remember you can always listen in podcast form to Idaho Matters. Just you can get that wherever you get podcasts. So, Anna, you and Cole actually spoke with a woman whose grandmother made pies from the supplies that she found on some of these wrecks. So let's play a little bit of that as well.
My family had, back in the shed, there were these big boxes. There were wooden crates with lard in them. I found out by asking that, well, where did the lard come from? And it came from a shipwreck. And it was a Russian ship, the Vaslavrovsky, that had all this lard aboard, and they used it in munitions. But I remember my grandma using the lard until it was gone. And she made really good pies. Her favorite was apple pie, and that was my grandpa's favorite too, so that's mostly what she made.
Yeah. Any rhubarb?
My grandma didn't like rhubarb.
Oh.
I think that's where I got it. I don't like rhubarb either.
Oh, well, let's not talk about that
Oh,
anymore.
okay.
I'm a big rhubarb person.
I agree. I'm not a fan of rhubarb. So, Anna, who is this? And tell us more about her and her stories of these shipwrecks.
Oh, this is the wonderful Donella Lucero. She's a volunteer at the Columbia Pacific Heritage Museum. She has a deep historical knowledge, and her family stories were some of the best. She knows a lot about all different shipwrecks, but I just couldn't get away from her own family stories that were so rich in tapestry in our film. Her grandfather and father would scavenge things like flour and lard and even plumbing parts from like toilets and pipes from these ships that would come into the coast. And those were especially valuable right after about World War II, when metal was being used for the war effort and commodities were hard to come by. So these items were very valuable and worth scavenging, worth going to get. And she talks about eating her grandmother's wonderful pie, as you heard there, and
Mm-hmm.
these mostly American apple pies. And so I kind of like to imagine them as an all-American shipwreck pie of sorts.
So, Anna, what was it that drew you to these stories and then wanting to tell them in this documentary format?
I like it when history can come alive, and it's always more nuanced and complicated than we learned in school, Gemma, and even in university. And it's so fabulous to learn from true experts about these stories and to hear firsthand accounts of history they or their families remember. And I just really appreciated the opportunity with our team at Northwest Public Broadcasting to bring this story forward.
And what are you hoping, Anna, that people take away from the documentary?
Well, first, I hope that people understand the huge team effort that it took to bring this story to life. From the experts we talked to, the Indigenous leader Tony Johnson of the Chinook Indian Nation, who invited us onto his back porch to explain things to us, to Donna Lucero at the museum in Owaco, Washington. And so many people were generous with their time for this project. Also, just the great team at NWPB who put this film together. Taylor Moss, our videographer, our producer, Jeff Collier, our editor, Jenna Dennison, and our copy editor, and Annie Warren, our producer, and Kara Williams Fry, my big boss and executive producer. You know, Gemma, I grew up on the coast in Western Washington, and we'd often go to the coast with my family, and we'd build driftwood forts, draw mazes in the
Mm-hmm.
sand, explore lighthouses, and run the beaches ragged with my cousins.
Yep.
And I just hope that a little bit of that childhood wonder of the mighty Northwest coast drifted into this documentary.
I tell you, you just described my childhood. I mean, we spent so much time on the Oregon coast growing up. Where can people watch the documentary, Anna, before I let you go?
Of course. So at nwpb.org, search for Wrecked. You're also able to find it on our YouTube channel. And I just hope you enjoy it as much as I enjoyed putting it together.
Well, Anna, it's so good to have you on the show. We've been talking with Anna King, Senior Correspondent and Special Projects Lead for Northwest Public Broadcasting, about the new documentary, Wrecked. We will, of course, put pictures, including one of the Peter Iredell, on our website, boisestatepublicradio.org. This is the Idaho Matters podcast. I'm Gemma Gaudette.
Sources and methods, the crown jewels of the intelligence community. Shorthand for how do we know what's real? Who told us? If you have those answers, you're on the inside, and NPR wants to bring you there. From the Pentagon to the State Department to spy agencies, listen to understand what's really happening and what it means for you. Sources and Methods, the new national security podcast from NPR.